Good morning. Welcome to the last summer service of 2020 at the Eliot Church of South Natick. It is good to be back with you. It is good to be together. We gather this morning across distance and across time to be in community, knowing that in times such as these, we need one another for motivation, for nourishment, for accountability, and for inspiration. As we transition in our own lives and as a church from summer into fall, we acknowledge that this will be a year unlike any other. And so we will reflect together this morning on what endurance athletes and Jesus have to teach us about pacing ourselves. Whether you are at the table, on the couch, walking, or watering your garden, you are joyfully called to worship.
Please join us now in the recitation of our covenant. In the love of truth and in the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all. Now let us sing our song of exaltation. Our first reading this morning is a selection of short excerpts from throughout the Gospel of Matthew. Then Jesus was led into the desert by the Spirit to be tempted by the devil. After fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus was hungry.
Later that day, Jesus left the house and sat down by the lakeshore. Such great crowds gathered that he went and took a seat in a boat while the crowd stood along the shore.
When Jesus heard about the beheading, he left Nazareth by boat and went to a deserted place to be alone. The crowds heard of this and followed him from their towns on foot.
Jesus insisted that the disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side. Having sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, remaining there alone as night fell.
6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up on a high mountain to be alone with them. And before their eyes, Jesus was transfigured.
When Jesus finished teaching there, he left Galilee and moved on to the area of Judea, across the Jordan River. Large crowds followed him.
Please join with me now in the spirit of prayer, beginning in silence as we lift our prayers for all of those in need this morning. Our spoken prayer this morning is adapted from the words of Nadia Boltz-Weber. God of many names, we don't know how to feel
less tired. We don't know how to vanquish our own fears. We don't know how to stop being angry at people. We don't know how to live through a global pandemic and anti-black violence and wildfires and hurricanes and the fact that Chadwick Boseman just died. We don't know how to sustain the effort it takes to not completely freak out. And the effort it takes to keep from freaking out is one of the things that is making us so tired. So we need some reminders right now, dear God. Remind us that for every tragedy that's newsworthy, there are a million kindnesses and countless acts of love that go unreported. But more than anything, remind us of our own souls. Remind us that there is an essential, holy, unhurtable part of ourselves that never tires, that does not know fear, that is unaffected by other people, that cannot be irritated, that has nothing to achieve. And if taking just a few deep breaths reminds us of our truest center, then nudge us, O God, to breathe. Amen. And now let us join in those words that Jesus taught the disciples. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And now a reading from Henry Nouwen, from Living the Reminder. Prayer is not a way of being busy with God instead of with people. In fact, it unmasks the illusions of busyness, usefulness, and indispensability. It is a way of being empty and useless in the presence of God, and so of proclaiming our basic belief that all is grace and nothing is simply the result of hard work. Indeed, wasting time for God is an act of ministry because it reminds us and our people that God is free to touch anyone, regardless of our well-meant efforts. Prayer, as an articulate way of being useless in the face of God, can bring a smile to all we do and a life-giving humor in the midst of our occupations and our preoccupations. Thinking of my own prayer, I realize how easily I make it into a little seminar with God, during which I want to be useful by reading beautiful prayers, thinking profound thoughts, and saying impressive words. I am obviously still worried about the grade. It, indeed, is a hard discipline to be useless in God's presence and to let God speak in the silence of my heart. But whenever I become a little useless, I know that God is calling me into a new life beyond the boundaries of my usefulness.
Friends, I am so happy to be back with you, to be back in this space and to embark on another year of shared ministry. This summer, those of us with the privilege to do so took a little bit of time to recuperate, perhaps spending more time outdoors and connecting with loved ones from our yards or on our driveways. Some of us might have taken a break from work or volunteer positions, or even given ourselves permission to unplug for a while. Since moving to New Haven, I have learned to slow down in the summer. I wish I could say it's because I have finally rejected the toxic culture of hyper-productivity in which we live. But really, it's because it's just too hot. Far enough north not to benefit from air conditioning, but far enough south to be in the 90s and humid all of July and August. The only real way to stay cool is to slow down. Time has a different feel. The days stretch into evening, and everything just takes longer. But the world keeps turning. While some of us rested, others among us have been trying to make ends meet. Taking care of sick family members, organizing for justice, searching for employment. It has been a summer of uprising against the sins of police brutality and structural racism, of an unprecedented virus outbreak in the southern United States, and of the ramping up of electoral campaigns. For those of us who had the privilege to rest, it is time to get back to work. For the privilege to rest comes with the responsibility to engage. The privilege to rest comes with the responsibility to engage. This year, however, we must re-examine the ways in which we engage. Many of us got through the spring operating on what Dr. Ann Maston, psychologist and professor of child development, calls surge capacity. Surge capacity is a collection of adaptive systems, mental and physical, that humans draw on for short-term survival in acutely stressful situations. Our surge capacity is what gets us through 24-hour hospital shifts, newborn babies, political campaigns, and short-term community organizing efforts. And that time after a death, but before the funeral, spent planning, organizing, calling, and visiting with loved ones. Short-term survival in acutely stressful situations. But as the pandemic is no longer an acute crisis, but a chronic one, as we become increasingly aware that issues of racial violence are not individual, but systemic and chronic, that rebuilding our nation will not happen in a 4-year term, we are learning the limits of surge capacity. In this ongoing season of collective uncertainty, heartbreak, and chronic stress, we must engage differently. This morning we face different unknowns, different fears, new questions than we did last spring. And they call for different skills, gifts, strategies, and efforts than before. Faithfully navigating this is going to take all that we have. And this morning, some among us awoke ready to embark on the journey. After a time of rest, I personally have much to give. But if I do not pace myself, by November, I will not. The winter will be bleak, the spring a crawl to the finish line. This will be true for all of us. We already have, however, the resources and the tools we need to choose a different path. And to not only choose that path, but to find abundance and meaning along the way. I truly believe this. This path is the commitment to pace ourselves. My two favorite examples of pacing oneself are endurance athletics and Jesus. They have more in common than you might think. If you have ever watched or participated in an endurance athletic competition, like the Boston Marathon, a trail running race, or a long cross-country ski race, you may have noticed that out on the course, what is called a feed station is set up. An area set up with people handing out watered-down glucose drinks like Gatorade or honey water. In my first 15-kilometer ski race, a freshman in college, I had never taken a feed before. Making the classic rookie mistake, I figured that easing up, grabbing a paper cup and taking a drink would cause me to drop from the pack, ultimately slowing me down. But you know what slows you down even more? Low blood sugar. The competitors who learn to pace themselves, who find their own most efficient way to take nourishment, even if it means temporarily dropping back and then catching back up, are the athletes who excel at sustaining hard efforts over long distances. More a bread and wine guy than a Gatorade drinker, Jesus models a different kind of pacing and nourishment. One that is not only physical, but addresses instead the heart and the spirit. In the short excerpts from the Gospel of Matthew that Adam and I shared with you this morning, we enter the story at the time of Jesus' public ministry. He has quite a following at this point, and people are gathering in crowds to be taught and healed. Jesus clearly loves his work and his people. But I also have to imagine that he found it all a little overwhelming. It is a lot to be on for other people all the time, even those we love the most. But when we look closely, we notice that he was not on all the time. He's actually a master at pacing. When Jesus heard about the beheading, he left Nazareth by boat and went to a deserted place to be alone. When Jesus finished teaching there, he left Galilee and moved on to the area of Judea, across the Jordan River. About 5,000 families were fed, and having sent the crowds away, Jesus went up on the mountain by himself to pray, remaining there alone until night fell. Jesus seems always to be running away from the crowds to hide, but not because he didn't love his people or his ministry. In fact, it likely was because he loved his people and his ministry so much, because he cared so deeply, that he made the intentional effort to recharge his own batteries, to rest and nourish his spirit, so that he could continue the work to which he was called. Perhaps it is because Jesus paced himself that he was able to transform minds and hearts, flip the tables in the temple, and model the way of radical justice and love in a time of empire. Like marathoners slowing down for nourishment while on course, like the Jewish practice of observing the Sabbath, or simply honoring moments of what Henry Nouwen calls being useless in the presence of God. Jesus may have felt at times as though he could have made a bigger difference, healed more bodies, spread more teachings if he pushed through and spent less time alone in prayer. But he chose to pace himself. And in doing so, he actually deepened his commitment to those who needed him the most. And so our call this fall season, individually and as a community, is to pace ourselves, to carry the practice of rest and intention into the unknown chaos of the coming year, to commit to an ongoing practice of prayer and pause, of slowing down, and to let that practice become our fuel for resiliency, endurance, creativity, and for hope. We are called to pace ourselves because as people of faith, the work of justice, the work of community, and the work and discomfort of living lives of radical love is our work. It is our work no matter how long it takes, or whether or not we will live to see the coming of the kingdom. Nouwen writes, "It is indeed a hard discipline to let God speak in the silence of my heart. But whenever I become a little useless, I know that God is calling me into a new life beyond the boundaries of my usefulness." God calls us into new life beyond the boundaries of our usefulness. For beyond our usefulness, our surge capacity and our frantic anxiety, a fierce hope and a radical love beckon us. So let us pace ourselves, and in doing so, heed the call together into new life. May it be so. Amen.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving, as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, come. voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now, my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now, my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest, so that we may give ourselves to the work of the world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move. Blessed be, and go in peace.